All right, let's get right into it. If you're revising for your AQA GCSE History paper on the Cold War, you've come to the right place. This is your high-speed revision guide to everything you need to know about the conflict between East and West from 1945 right up to 1972.
So, here's what we're going to cover. We're going to walk through this chronologically, right in line with the syllabus. We'll start with how the war began, see how Europe was divided, look at the terrifying arms race, dive into the biggest crises, and then wrap up with the key things you absolutely need to remember for your exam. Sound good? Let's go.
Okay, so where does all of this kick off? Well, it actually starts right at the end of World War II. You'd think it would be a time for celebration, right? But believe it or not, the alliance that had just saved the world was already starting to fall apart. And this is the big question, isn't it? The one that underpins everything. How on earth did the USA and the Soviet Union go from fighting on the same side to becoming bitter enemies? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of mistrust, different ambitions, and two completely opposite ways of seeing the world. This slide right here gets to the very heart of the conflict. It was a clash of ideologies. You had the USA, all about capitalism, individual freedom, and democracy. Then you had the USSR, built on communism, where the state controlled everything and one party had total power. These systems weren't just a little different. They were polar opposites. They couldn't both be the world's #1 system. And you can really see these cracks starting to show at the big wartime conferences. At Yalta, things seemed okay. They were still allies, after all. But just a few months later at Potsdam, everything had changed. Roosevelt was gone, Truman was in, and he did not trust Stalin one bit. Plus, Truman was sitting on a huge secret, the atomic bomb, and that changed the power dynamic completely. So, this clash of ideas, it wasn't just talk. It became a real, physical thing. In this next part, we're going to see how it literally sliced the continent of Europe in two. And who better to give this new reality a memorable name than Winston Churchill? In 1946, he gave this incredible speech where he talked about an iron curtain coming down. It was such a powerful image, this idea of a barrier separating the free West from the Soviet-controlled East. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's crazy how fast everything happened. One event led to another, which led to another. It was like a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and faster. Each of these dates is a key moment that pushed the two sides further and further apart. Okay, the Truman Doctrine. If you remember one policy, make it this one. This was basically America drawing a line in the sand. They said, that's it, communism spreads no further. This policy of containment meant the U.S. was now committed to getting involved anywhere in the world to stop the Soviets. A massive change for America. You know, the Cold War wasn't just fought with spies and soldiers. It was an economic battleground. America launched the Marshall Plan, pumping billions into Western Europe to help it rebuild and make capitalism look good. Stalin, of course, saw this as America just buying friends. He called it dollar imperialism, so he created his own version, Comecon, to lock the Eastern European economies into the Soviet system. So Europe is split, politically, economically. What comes next? Well, the military side of things. And this is where the Cold War gets truly terrifying and goes from a European problem to a global one. Think of it like this. The two teams were finally picking their sides and putting on their jerseys. In the West, you have NATO, a huge military alliance built on one simple promise. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. The Soviet Union's answer? The Warsaw Pact, which did the exact same thing for the Eastern Bloc countries. The world was now officially divided. And this superpower showdown played out in two massive arenas. First, the arms race, a frankly insane competition to build bigger and bigger bombs, enough to destroy the planet many times over. And then, at the same time, you had the space race, a battle for bragging rights, really. The Soviets got an early lead with Sputnik and the first man in space, but the US ultimately won by landing on the moon. Now, this is super important to remember for your exams. We call it the Cold War, but for millions of people in places like Korea and Vietnam, it was anything but cold. It was a brutally hot war. The superpowers avoided fighting each other directly, but they poured weapons and soldiers into these other conflicts, these proxy wars, to fight each other indirectly. This all leads us into the most dangerous part of a whole story. We're going to look at the flashpoints that almost tipped the world into World War III, and how that fear, paradoxically, led to the two sides finally trying to cool things down a bit. And these events right here, they tell you everything you need to know about the Soviet mindset. Anytime a country in their sphere of influence tried to get even a little bit of freedom, like Hungary in 56 or Czechoslovakia in 68, the response was swift and brutal, tanks rolling in to crush the rebellion. And the Berlin Wall? Well, that became the ultimate symbol of communist control. Okay, Cuba, 1962. If there's one crisis you need to know inside and out, it is this one. For 13 days, the entire world held its breath. The Soviets put nuclear missiles in Cuba, right on America's doorstep. President Kennedy blockaded the island, and the two leaders entered this insane game of nuclear chicken. It was the closest we have ever come to all-out nuclear war, and only a secret back-channel deal pulled us back from the brink. So, after putting down the Prague Spring, the Soviets basically decided to write down the rules. They called it the Brezhnev Doctrine, and it was pretty simple. If you're a communist country in our bloc, you're not allowed to leave. And if you try, we have the right to invade you to protect communism. It was their official excuse for using force. You know, almost blowing up the entire world has a funny way of making you rethink things. And that's exactly what happened after Cuba. The sheer terror of what almost happened forced both leaders to realize that direct confrontation was suicide. This, plus the insane cost of the arms race, opened the door to a new phase, détente, which just means an easing of tensions. This new period was led by Nixon in the US and Brezhnev in the USSR. The whole point was just to talk, to manage the rivalry so it didn't spiral out of control again. And they actually had some success. The biggest achievement was the SALT I Treaty in 1972, which was the first time ever that the two sides agreed to limit their number of nuclear weapons. A huge step. Okay, that was a lot to take in. So let's take a breath and boil it all down. What are the absolute must-knows that you can take with you into that exam hall? Right, these are your golden tickets for the exam. First, the ideological conflict. It's the why behind everything. Second, containment. That was America's whole game plan. Third, spheres of influence. Know how the world was divided up. Fourth, the arms race and the threat of nuclear war. And finally, have your key examples ready. Berlin, Cuba, Hungary, use them as evidence. If you can explain these 5 themes, you are building a fantastic answer. So I'll leave you with this thought, one of those big questions that examiners love. With two worldviews so completely different, was a major conflict like the Cold War just inevitable, or could things have gone differently? Something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in, and best of luck with your revision. You've got this.